In the blazing desert between El Paso and Mexico, one man built a billion-dollar empire that defied logic, law, and the FBI itself. His name was Jimmy Chagra, a gambler, smuggler, and mastermind who turned the war on drugs into his personal business plan. While others hid in shadows, Chagra lived like a king, rolling dice in Las Vegas casinos, betting millions, and walking freely among politicians, judges, and agents sworn to destroy him. He wasn't just a drug lord. He was a strategist, a man who used charm and money as weapons sharper than any gun. The FBI chased him for years, but every time they got close, Jimmy slipped away, leaving no trace but rumors and riches. His influence reached so high that when justice finally tried to catch up, the unthinkable happened. A federal judge was assassinated in cold blood. The event sent shockwaves through America and turned Chagra from a Vegas legend into a national obsession. This is the story of how one man outsmarted the FBI, challenged the U.S. government, and built an empire so powerful it almost broke the system designed to destroy him. The 1970s were an era of wild money, bright lights, and darker secrets. America was fighting a losing war, not overseas, but within its own borders. Drugs were flooding the streets, and law enforcement was desperate to stop it. Out of this chaos rose a man who didn't just join the game, he rewrote its rules. Jimmy Chagra wasn't your typical criminal. He was charming, intelligent, and fearless. He dressed like a millionaire, spoke like a businessman, and lived like royalty in a world built on danger. From the casinos of Las Vegas to the dusty borders of El Paso, Chagra's empire stretched farther than the FBI could imagine. He smuggled tons of marijuana and cocaine across the U.S.-Mexico border, turning illegal trade into a billion-dollar operation. But what made him truly dangerous wasn't his product. It was his ability to manipulate power. He bribed officials, bought protection, and built an invisible network of informants that kept him one step ahead of every raid and arrest. Yet, power always comes with a price. As the walls began to close in, Jimmy took desperate measures to protect his empire. And when a fearless federal judge named John H. Wood Jr. threatened to end his reign, Chagra's next move would shock the entire nation. This wasn't just the story of a drug lord. It was the story of a man who outsmarted the system, outplayed the FBI, and nearly brought the American justice system to its knees. Jimmy Chagra's rise began in the sun-baked streets of El Paso, Texas, a place where opportunity and danger often walked hand in hand. Born Jamiel Jimmy Chagra in 1944, he came from a hard-working Lebanese-American family that valued ambition and success. But while others chased honest business, Jimmy's eyes were set on something bigger, the untapped gold mine running through the desert: drugs. What started as small-time marijuana smuggling soon turned into one of the most sophisticated trafficking networks in American history. By the early 1970s, Jimmy had transformed himself from a local hustler into a drug kingpin with international reach. He used charisma as his greatest weapon, charming border agents, building relationships with cartel suppliers in Mexico, and winning over people who could open doors others never could. Unlike the violent traffickers who ruled through fear, Chagra operated with intelligence and persuasion. He understood that money could move mountains, and he used it to build an empire that connected El Paso to Las Vegas and beyond. Jimmy's life was a paradox. By day, he was a high-rolling gambler seen at the most exclusive casinos in Vegas, the Dunes, Caesar's Palace, the Sands. By night, he was a mastermind coordinating shipments worth millions of dollars. His wealth was staggering. He spent money as fast as he made it, flying in private jets, buying luxury cars, and showering casino staff with $100 tips. Yet behind the glitz, every roll of the dice had blood on it. The risk of betrayal, arrest, or worse. Chagra's operation wasn't just about smuggling, it was about strategy. He turned family into his inner circle. His brother Lee Chagra, a skilled defense attorney, became his legal shield, finding loopholes and outsmarting prosecutors at every turn. Another brother, Joe Chagra, helped manage the logistics and negotiations. Together, they built what law enforcement would later call a family-run cartel, where every move was calculated and every connection protected. As the DEA began tightening its grip on border smuggling, Jimmy's network evolved. He shifted from simple trafficking to a complex operation involving money laundering, coded communication, and bribery at multiple levels of authority. Customs officials were paid off to look the other way, truckers were trained to move hidden compartments, and bankers helped disguise illicit profits as gambling wins. He made sure there were no paper trails, no obvious evidence, just a trail of rumors and suspicion. But with success came visibility, and visibility meant danger. Chagra's flamboyant lifestyle caught the attention of both the media and federal agents. His million-dollar bets at Vegas casinos weren't just entertainment. They were warnings to those who doubted his power. To the FBI, it seemed impossible that a man so public could be running such a vast criminal network. But that was Jimmy's genius. He hid in plain sight. The cracks, however, were beginning to show. The more powerful he became, the more enemies he made, both in law enforcement and the underworld. Rival smugglers envied his reach. The FBI began building a case, tracking his associates and intercepting his calls. Yet every time they thought they had him, their operations leaked. Someone was always one step ahead, and that someone was Jimmy. He had eyes everywhere, including inside the agencies chasing him. By the mid-1970s, Chagra wasn't just rich. He was untouchable. But in the world of crime, the higher you climb, the harder you fall. Jimmy's empire stood on a foundation of risk, corruption, and secrets, and all it would take was one betrayal, one mistake, to make it crumble. What no one knew then was that Jimmy's greatest gamble was yet to come, one that would change the course of American justice forever. Las Vegas was where Jimmy Chagra truly became a legend, a man who lived louder, risked bigger, and spent faster than anyone in the room. To him, the casino floor wasn't just entertainment. It was business, a stage, and a way to clean his growing fortune. The City of Lights became the perfect cover for his billion-dollar empire. Surrounded by slot machines and champagne, Jimmy blurred the line between gambling profits and drug money so effectively that even federal investigators struggled to separate one from the other. At the Dunes and Caesar's Palace, Chagra was treated like royalty. He'd walk in wearing designer suits, followed by an entourage of bodyguards and high-stakes gamblers. He would tip dealers with $100 bills and drop millions at the poker table without blinking. Every move was part of a strategy. The bigger he played, the more legitimate he looked. To casino managers, he was just another Vegas high roller. To the FBI, he was a ghost hiding behind flashing lights and noise. But beneath the glitz, Jimmy's empire was beginning to show cracks. His brother and closest advisor, Lee Chagra, played a critical role, not just as a lawyer, but as a diplomat between crime and law. Lee negotiated deals, paid off officials, and helped launder money through casinos and offshore accounts. Together, they built a system so intricate that it felt bulletproof. Yet, in the world of organized crime, nothing stays hidden forever. The DEA began noticing strange cash flows, millions moving through casinos, shell companies, and luxury purchases. Each lead, however, led to a dead end. Witnesses were scared, officials were bribed, and informants vanished. The FBI grew increasingly frustrated, calling Chagra the most connected smuggler in America. He wasn't violent, but he was dangerous, because his power came from intelligence, not intimidation. Then came the turning point: Lee Chagra's murder. In December 1978, Lee was shot and killed inside his El Paso office during what appeared to be a robbery. But nothing about it made sense. The killers seemed to know exactly where to find the money, and Lee's expensive watch and jewelry were left behind. Many suspected it wasn't a random attack. It was a message. Some said rivals wanted to send Jimmy a warning. Others believed law enforcement pressure had pushed too many people too far. Lee's death shattered Jimmy. The man who once moved with confidence now began to crumble inside. He started using cocaine heavily, becoming paranoid and unpredictable. His glamorous lifestyle in Vegas turned into late-night binges and erratic behavior. Without Lee's steady hand, Jimmy's organization began to fall apart. Deals went wrong, shipments were lost, and partners turned against each other. Meanwhile, the FBI finally saw its chance. Agents began closing in, building a massive case linking Chagra to large-scale trafficking and conspiracy. They monitored his calls, followed his movements, and prepared indictments. But Jimmy, ever the gambler, refused to fold. He believed his money, charm, and influence could still save him. In the city built on chance, Jimmy Chagra had always played to win. But this time, the stakes were higher than ever, and the house was about to turn against him. What came next would push Chagra beyond the world of drugs and gambling into a crime that would shake America to its core. By 1979, Jimmy Chagra's luxurious world of wealth and gambling began to collapse under the weight of federal investigations. The DEA and FBI had finally pieced together the puzzle of his billion-dollar empire, and they were ready to strike. Facing multiple indictments, Chagra was about to be tried before a man known for his uncompromising justice, Judge John H. Wood, Jr., nicknamed Maximum John. Wood was feared by every major drug trafficker in the Southwest for his long, merciless sentences. To Jimmy, standing trial before him meant only one thing: life behind bars. For the first time in his career, Chagra felt the walls closing in. His empire was shrinking, his allies disappearing, and the pressure mounting. What came next was one of the darkest and most shocking chapters in American criminal history. On the morning of May 29, 1979, Judge Wood was shot and killed outside his San Antonio home. A clean, calculated assassination. The killing marked the first murder of a federal judge in modern U.S. history, and it sent shockwaves through the nation. The message was clear: someone had gone too far. Immediately, suspicion turned toward Jimmy Chagra. He had the motive, the money, and the desperation. Investigators learned that Chagra had connections with a notorious contract killer named Charles Harrelson, a violent man already feared in criminal circles and later known as the father of actor Woody Harrelson. Witnesses came forward with claims that Chagra had discussed wanting Judge Wood out of the way, while phone records and secret payments began to paint a damning picture. The FBI launched one of its largest manhunts in history. Dozens of agents were assigned to the Wood Task Force, tracing money transfers, wiretaps, and testimonies that all seemed to lead back to Chagra. But as always, Jimmy denied everything. He claimed he was being framed by informants seeking reduced sentences, and that the government had twisted his words to build a false narrative. Behind the scenes, his once loyal allies were beginning to turn. His wife, Elizabeth Chagra, became a central figure in the investigation, accused of helping deliver payments related to the murder plot. His brother, Joe Chagra, terrified of facing the same fate, started cooperating with authorities. For the first time, the family that once operated like a fortress began to fracture. The murder of Judge Wood became national news, a scandal that revealed how far corruption and power had reached inside America's justice system. The country was stunned that a single man, once seen as a flashy gambler, could allegedly orchestrate the killing of a federal judge. The case wasn't just about drugs anymore. It was about the collapse of faith in law and order itself. As evidence piled up and the public demanded justice, Jimmy Chagra found himself at the center of an unprecedented legal storm. The government vowed to make an example of him. But Jimmy, even cornered, refused to give in. He was ready to fight the biggest battle of his life, not on the streets, but in the courtroom. What followed would become one of the most extraordinary trials in American history, filled with betrayal, secrets, and the shocking possibility that the man who outsmarted the FBI might just outsmart the system once again. The courtroom in San Antonio was packed to the walls. Reporters, FBI agents, lawyers, and curious onlookers all came to witness the trial that America couldn't stop talking about. The case of United States versus Jimmy Chagra had become a national obsession, not just because of the shocking murder of Judge John H. Wood Jr., but because it exposed the corruption, greed, and arrogance at the heart of the American drug war. Jimmy Chagra, the once celebrated Las Vegas high roller, now stood accused of being the man who ordered the first assassination of a federal judge in modern history. The prosecution painted Chagra as a ruthless mastermind who would do anything to protect his billion-dollar empire. They presented tapes, witnesses, and bank records suggesting that Jimmy had paid Charles Harrelson to carry out the hit. The story was as sensational as it was dark. A drug lord buying death to avoid justice. The jury listened in silence as prosecutors replayed phone calls and introduced testimony from former associates who had turned on Chagra in exchange for lighter sentences. But the defense had its own strategy, and it was brilliant. Jimmy's legal team, backed by his wife Elizabeth and his brother Joe, claimed he was the victim of a corrupt system desperate for a conviction. They argued there was no physical evidence directly tying him to the murder, only rumors, paid witnesses, and hearsay. They reminded the jury that Jimmy had always been the target of federal obsession, that he was a gambler, yes, but not a killer. As the trial unfolded, it became clear that this was more than a criminal case. It was a clash between power and rebellion, the law and those who learned how to bend it. The government poured in millions to secure a conviction, while Chagra's defense spared no expense in dismantling every argument the prosecution made. Then came the shocking twist. Against all odds, Jimmy Chagra was acquitted of the judge's murder. The courtroom gasped. Some jurors later said the evidence was too circumstantial, while others believed the government had overreached. However, Chagra wasn't walking away free. He was still convicted on major drug trafficking charges, sentenced to decades in federal prison for the empire he built. For the FBI and DEA, it was a bitter victory. They had brought down one of the biggest drug lords in the country, but failed to convict him for the crime that made history. For Jimmy, it was a hollow win. The wealth, freedom, and glamour that once defined him were gone. His wife, Elizabeth, faced her own charges and would spend years behind bars. His brother Joe, who had turned against him, lived the rest of his life in guilt and fear. The trial of the century became a turning point in America's war on drugs, proof that even the most powerful criminals could manipulate the system, and that sometimes justice could be outsmarted. Jimmy Chagra had beaten the murder charge, but the legend he built was now cracking. His world of luxury and influence had turned into a prison cell. Yet even there, behind concrete walls, Chagra's story was far from over. The man who outwitted the FBI still had one more act left: the fall of the billion-dollar king. Prison was supposed to be the end of Jimmy Chagra's story, a concrete cage for the man who once flew private jets, played million-dollar poker hands, and rubbed shoulders with celebrities. But for Chagra, it was just another arena. Even behind bars, he remained the same smooth-talking gambler who knew how to bend the odds in his favor. From inside the prison walls, Jimmy continued to manipulate, negotiate, and survive with the same cunning that had built his empire. Guards, inmates, and even officials were drawn to his charm. He was no ordinary prisoner. He was a living legend. But the outside world was changing fast. The war on drugs that Jimmy once danced circles around had grown larger, meaner, and deadlier. The government was now pouring billions into enforcement, and new drug lords were rising from Colombia and Mexico. cartels that made Chagra's empire look small by comparison. For the first time, Jimmy wasn't in control. His connections faded, his money disappeared, and the empire he had built with his brothers and wife was nothing but a story in old FBI files. Still, Jimmy refused to give up. He used his legal knowledge and charisma to file appeals, cut deals, and stay relevant inside the system. For decades, he lived as both a survivor and a ghost. A man who had once stood at the top of America's underworld, now pacing a prison yard, remembering his glory days. In rare interviews, he admitted his regrets. The choices that led to betrayal, the addiction that clouded his judgment, and the greed that consumed everything he loved. As years passed, Chagra became a symbol of a lost era. The flashy, fast-talking smuggler who defied the FBI, bribed judges, and changed the course of the war on drugs. He eventually gained early release in the early 2000s after serving more than 2 decades behind bars. Living under a new identity in Arizona, he tried to stay out of the spotlight. Friends said he spent his final years quietly, reflecting on how quickly power turns to dust. In 2008, Jimmy Chagra died of cancer, not in a shootout, not in a courtroom, but in silence. The man who once ruled an empire died an ordinary man. Yet his story endures as a chilling reminder of how charisma, intelligence, and money can twist justice, and how one gambler from El Paso nearly outplayed the entire American legal system. He had everything: fortune, fame, power, and lost it all. But in legend, Jimmy Chagra still lives on, remembered as the billion-dollar drug lord who outsmarted the FBI and came closer than anyone else to breaking the system designed to destroy him.